the Sentinel loses money, I subsidize it.
Right.
I've subsidized it since the day I bought it back. What I'm up against is this realization that it doesn't matter how good your newspaper is, there are just a declining number of readers and declining number of advertisers. I don't know if I can ever get it to break even. And I'm public about it. I tell people we lost $52,000 last year. I don't know if we can save newspapers. I used to think, we could. Perseverance, hard work, better products, but and this is not to condemn the world. That's just not how people get their news anymore.
Welcome to the East Anchorage Book Club. I'm your host, Andrew Gray. The purpose of this podcast is to tell the stories of Alaskans of interest and importance. Today, our guest is Larry Persily, the owner and publisher of the weekly newspaper, the Wrangell Sentinel. Larry and his wife first purchased that newspaper in 1976 and moved to Alaska from Chicago, where they poured their hearts into making that newspaper work for 8.5 years. They then left Wrangell for Juneau, where they pursued their careers as journalists, and where Larry's wife tragically died in a car accident. After almost 50 years as an on-again, off-again journalist at such publications as the Anchorage Times, the Associated Press, the Juneau Empire, and the Anchorage Daily News, Larry repurchased the Wrangell Sentinel and has been trying to make that newspaper pencil out. Although our focus today is on the media in Alaska, we do discuss his time as the federal coordinator for Alaska natural gas transportation projects, a position he was appointed to by President Obama, and the prospects for an Alaska natural gas pipeline today. Larry Persily, Welcome to the podcast. Tell us a little bit about your early life.
I was born in Chicago. I was born in Hyde Park before Barack Obama lived in Hyde Park. So south side of Chicago, went to college in Indiana, moved back to Chicago afterwards, but graduated college.
Tell us about your parents. I'm going to slow down.
Okay.
What'd your parents do?
Oh, well, let's see. Other than a communist, as my dad.
Was he a communist?
He was a labor communist. Interesting story there. We always knew my dad was to the left and had probably been a communist at some point. In fact, he had pretty much admitted it.
Was he born in the 20s, teens?
Yeah. He was born in the early 20s in New York, Brooklyn. First generation U.S. His parents immigrated from Ukraine. Anyway, a few years ago, my brother said, gee, I wonder if there's an FBI file. So we put in a freedom of information request. After about 1.5 years, we got it. Dad was followed by the FBI. They had hundreds of pages of redacted information. It was interesting reading through that. I recognized a lot of the names. It's like, I know Lloyd Mendelson. I know Peter Voinovich. These are family friends.
They came over to your house.
Right, family friends. They had followed my dad to union meetings. They described him as a thug in these FBI files, which I thought, he did have a temper. I'm not sure I'd call him a thug. Anyway, he was a part of that labor movement in the U.S. in the 40s, 50s, who saw communism as a possible answer and then realized, that doesn't work either. Yeah, my parents, as I've told people, I think the first concert I went to as a kid was Pete Seeger, and we would trick or treat for UNICEF, not for ourselves. So I was raised in a left of center household in Chicago. And we all know people who grow up to be the exact opposite of their parents.
Right.
No, I was pretty close. I mean, I'm Jewish, but we weren't practicing. We didn't go to a synagogue. But I was definitely raised in a household where you were taught that you're part of a bigger world and being selfish is not the answer. That we lived in when I first moved there in the 50s, a Jewish neighborhood in a industrial area of Chicago. To get downtown, I had to take the bus or the train. We'd pass through. Back then, we called them the ghettos. And I'd pass through those neighborhoods, and it was so depressing. And this was in the 60s, civil rights and riots in the cities. And I thought to myself then, if I had to live in neighborhoods like this, of course I'd riot. I got nothing to lose. I got no services, the schools, the housing, the streets. It's all decrepit. Yeah, I'd probably riot too. I don't blame people. Then high school was a little more ethnically diverse than my elementary school, but even in the 60s in Chicago, it was a very racially segregated community. The gym teacher, when we'd go outside to play baseball, and I won't use the terms he used, but he would divide the teams by ethnicity and race. So he'd say, well, essentially blacks, the Jews, the Polish descendant, the Mexicans. That's how he'd split up the teams, because he figured, well, you guys live together, you hang out together, and might as well do baseball that way.
Interesting. What did your mom do? And was your mom also descendant of Ukrainian immigrants?
No, her's Polish.
Polish.
Though, seems to me in the teens and 20s, Poland, Ukraine, it was sort of a flexible
Right.
border. Yeah. So she also was first generation born here. And she worked in property management for Continental Bank, an office job, which is what women in the 60s, 70s, 80s did, was office jobs.
You mentioned your brother. Did you have any other siblings?
Well, I had an older brother who died at a young age, but I have a younger brother and a sister who actually were just here this summer for the first time with their spouses in the 49 years I've lived here.
They came for the first time.
Yeah. You know, they're not outdoors, so it's not like, oh my God, I get to Alaska and go skiing or hiking. They have used their vacations to go to Europe or other places. So they, all four of them, 2 siblings, 2 spouses came up. And it was during that early June when the weather was just crappy. My parents, obviously long ago when we first moved here, they came up a few times and they really liked it. So getting back to my dad's politics, so his whole family, his 2 brothers, they're all pretty left. And my dad never traveled overseas. We grew up in Chicago. For us, the trips were either Illinois, Indiana, Ohio, Michigan, Wisconsin. That was the entire world. No one took airplanes anywhere. It was kind of the range of the car and a tank of gas. But his older brother had fought in the Abraham Lincoln Brigade, Americans who went over to fight against Franco. And they had a reunion of the Abraham Lincoln Brigade. And that's finally what got my dad to leave the country and go overseas. So they went to Spain, had a great time, and then they started traveling as much as they could before health stopped them from traveling.
So did he go back to the homeland?
No, they never went back to Ukraine.
So you went to Purdue.
Right, I did.
You graduated in 72 with a BA in journalism.
I did. I went there as a chemistry major and was going to flunk out, and I had to change majors.
Okay. Yeah, no, I was going to ask, like, why journalism?
Because I went there on a scholarship, chem major. I was on probation as a freshman after the first semester. The only class I passed my first semester was English, so that was maybe a clue. And
well, if you had to have had an interest in chemistry before,
I
you had
did.
to have done well in school.
a couple things. One, I went to college at 16, so I was too immature. And I hadn't thought it out. So I did well in high school, but it was a city school in Chicago where they graded on the curve. So
You just had to do better than the people around you.
right, you just sit on your ass and you get B's. And if
Right.
you worked at all, you get an A. Then you go to college and you're an immature 16-year-old and no one did the math and said, Larry, there's no curve here because the 80% are gone. You're
Right.
right. So I learned that you have to apply yourself in college. But anyway, one of my friends in the dorm said, oh, it's volunteer call-out night at the newspaper. We should go down. And I thought, well, my dad was a printer. I thought, well, I don't know, that'd be kind of fun, printing press and stuff. So I went down to the newspaper and also realized they were having a lot of fun writing, being a reporter, being nosy, asking questions, understanding things. So I thought, well, this is as good a major as any. Switch majors as second semester freshman. And that started the journalism career at the newspaper. Because also, this is 1969. There was that feeling of camaraderie. We're going to fix the world through the campus newspaper.
So you moved after university to
Back to Chicago. Yeah.
And did you go to work for a newspaper?
Magazine at first, a company that owns something called Advertising Age. But I worked for their business insurance publication, which actually, you look back on things, one of those great first jobs out of college. I've learned in that first year so much about insurance that has served me well in life and how it works. Reinsurance, insurance is one of those things you can't function without it. So I went back to Chicago, did a job with the insurance magazine, then worked for something called Chicago Magazine, one of these glossy, slick, four-color guides to the city. And it was a different demographic than I was used to. So I got hired as the production editor for this sort of classy city magazine. And I'm anything but classy. And the staff took me out to lunch that first day, new employee, because back then they had expense accounts, and this is off North Michigan Avenue, which is the very nice part of downtown. Anyway, we went to some place called Chez Paul for lunch. Hell, I didn't even know how to pronounce Chez. I thought Chez was Che Guevara. I didn't know Chez Paul. So we go to lunch, and one of the ad execs who was at lunch with us ordered steak tartare. I had never seen that in my life. Raw ground beef with a raw egg cracked on top. And I thought, who am I hanging out with? What is wrong with these people? But it broadened my horizons to work for them. And then after that magazine job, I went to newspapers in Chicago and did that for 2.5 years.
Did you meet your wife during that period?
Yeah. So actually, I met her first at my first job, that insurance magazine, and then met her again when I ended up at these community newspapers in Chicago. And
She was a journalist as well?
yeah, she was. Not a journalism major. She was a philosophy major. And I don't know. What's a philosophy major do? I think she went to a college where you had to do kind of a dissertation to graduate, even with a bachelor's, and it was on the philosophy of humor. I think I still have the paper somewhere. Anyway, but yeah, she was a journalist.
Her name was Leslie Marie.
In fact, her first job out of college was at Cosmopolitan magazine in Chicago.
Wow.
Which, as a lowly editorial assistant, and she was always a little bit embarrassed about it. Cosmo, sort of not the liberated woman of the 70s. So when she died, I thought, oh, do I put that in the obituary that she worked at Cosmo? I thought, oh, hell, you got to put it in the obituary.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So you guys moved to Alaska in 76?
Yeah, May of 76 to Wrangell.
And you purchased the paper.
Right. Reading a trade publication one night, saw the classified ads, which I always find fascinating. Saw this newspaper for sale in Alaska. We weren't looking to buy a newspaper. We weren't looking to move to Alaska. But I don't know. I like playing with the phone. I had a phone number, so we called. And a switchboard operator answered. Because back then, there wasn't direct dial in and out of Wrangell. So anyway, Francis, who's the evening switchboard operator, who also was the night clerk at the Thunderbird Hotel, answered. I said, I'm looking for Jamie Bryson at the Sentinel. And she said, oh, they're closed now. I said, well, can I switch me to his house? Oh, no, he's having dinner somewhere. She knew. She knew everything. So she switched me to the friend's house where the owner was having dinner that night.
So you were able to speak to him that night?
Yeah.
She was like, well, I'll just patch you through to his friend's house.
Right. She knew where he was having dinner.
And so you love that?
I found it quirky.
Yeah. I mean, because it's one thing to move to Alaska, but moving to Wrangell is...
Well, it wasn't Anchorage. Right.
Right. It wasn't Anchorage.
Right.
It wasn't
they still had party lines in 1976. Hell, Front Street wasn't paved. As oil money started coming, of course, things got a lot better. And so we flew up one weekend, looked at it, decided, oh, okay, we'll give this a try, moved back, and then in 5 weeks' time, quit our jobs, sold everything we owned, got married, and moved.
I assume the paper wasn't that expensive, because I'm thinking that you guys probably didn't have a lot of money.
That was the other thing. It was $6,000 down, and he would carry the contract for the rest. And we sort of looked at our bank accounts. Now, the good thing is the newspaper we both worked for the same paper in Chicago, was a union shop. It was a newspaper guild. So we got paid decently. Leslie had no college debt. I had paid off my college debt already. So we looked and said, oh, we got $6,000 between us. This is 1976. I have no idea what $6,000 is worth today, but
a lot more.
We had it. And we thought, well, why not? We knew we had $6,000. We knew we had enough to buy plane tickets. We hadn't factored in that once you take over a business, you have expenses on the first day, but you have no income for a month till you send out invoices. And we didn't really have a whole lot left after the 6,000. So things were tight, so much so that back then you'd put your 50 cents into the box to get a newspaper out. we'd go around and empty out the quarters initially, so we had enough money to live for that first month and buy some groceries. A little tight, but then after cash flow started coming, it worked out.
Were you two the only employees at the paper?
Initially, yeah. And then as things got better, we actually were able to hire at the, I want to say the height, but when things were going the best, there were the two of us. We had a full-time reporter and then 2 half-time office people.
And were you just covering Wrangell?
Wrangell or things of interest to Wrangell. So certainly the federal program that subsidizes Alaska Airlines for the milk run through Wrangell, Petersburg, or the ferry system. So it's not necessarily just Wrangell City Council or Wrangell School Board, but the whole Tongass land use management debate, which I've just, after 50 years, I don't want to ever have to write anything more about Tongass land use. I'm just tired of it. So Southeast issues that relate to Wrangell.
Well, I'm going to bounce back to this, but I just want to say that you're the byline for the Wrangell Sentinel right now, like 4 stories a week.
Yeah, so I bought the paper back 4.5 years ago. I was just getting frustrated following it through the years, and I thought, oh, hell, I'll just buy it, hire some staff, and then I can extricate myself. The problem I'm having is, and I'd like to think it's not because of me, staff quit. The 20-somethings who moved to Alaska in the 70s and stayed forever, I'm just not finding them. They stay 6 months or 8 months, they're done with their adventure, and they leave. So with constant turnover, I find myself having to write a lot more than I'd want to, because you get a new reporter who has to come up to speed.
Okay, well, since we're talking about that, I'm going to go there because you're like number 5 in this series that I've done. So I've done Pat Doherty. I've interviewed Ryan Binkley.
Yeah.
I've interviewed Nat Hers. I've interviewed a couple of other people. The point is that something that no one's really disagreed with is that being a journalist in Alaska today is a young person's game, in large part because people can't support. Oh, Tom Hewitt. It's important for me to say that because
moved on to Fairbanks.
He did because he got a divorce. His wife had basically been the major breadwinner, and when they got a divorce, he was like, "Well, I cannot support myself on what I'm making from the ADN." And it's something that you could do in your 20s when you don't mind living like more of a starving student. But the moment that you want to own a home and pay for your kids to do after school things, journalism in Alaska is not going to pay for it.
Oh, you can't have kids. You can do, when we were in our 20s, sure, a lot of macaroni and cheese, but you couldn't afford to put hot dogs in it. You just had to go with a straight mac and cheese.
So that's what it was for you and your wife back initially 50 years ago.
Yeah, it was. But again, if you don't have kids,
well, Pat Doherty,
a lot cheaper.
I mean, and granted, he was the editor of the ADN in a period when lots of money was being spent on the paper. He said he was able to send his daughter to college. He was able to have the life that he wanted to have.
But he was the editor.
He was the editor, and it's in his podcast interview, so people can go back and hear this. Yeah. He worked for 2 years at the Alaska Advocate before he went to the ADN, and he said, and I took no pay. And I said, how did you do that? And he was like, my girlfriend at the time and then my wife supported me. Yeah. And so it's like, I have a few people telling the story. Yeah. I did this job because my spouse was making money.
Sure. And I think that's true. Your spouse, boy, if they have a government job, teachers, then you have health insurance, which a lot of papers can't afford. If you have to have one solid, good income. You can't live off 2 crappy incomes. Yeah, and that is a problem. And I like to think I pay better than, well, I don't know about the Daily News, but I think I pay better than most of the small weeklies in Alaska. But the ones who have left on me, I don't think it's the money. I think they just
had enough of Alaska. They were ready to go back to
North Korea. It was a fun stint in life, but they didn't want to be part of the community and settle in here. I mean, I'll be honest, I pay reporters $50,000, $52,000 a year, which is, I think,
fair.
Yeah. You can live off that, particularly in Wrangell, the cost of living is lower. The rent in Wrangell matches the economics of the town. It's a depressed economy. You can rent a furnished 1-bedroom place in Wrangell for $900 a month. You can't get that here.
No, you can't. Wrangell, I'm just going to guess, and you can correct me, that the Wrangell Sentinel, is it earning enough for you to pay your reporters $52,000?
No, it loses money. I subsidize it.
Right.
I've subsidized it since the day I bought it back. my hope was that if we improved the product, it could break even. What I'm up against is this realization that it doesn't matter how good your newspaper is, there are just a declining number of readers and declining number of advertisers. I don't know if I can ever get it to break even. I'd like to reduce the losses.
Well, one of the things Pat said in his interview is most people would be shocked at just how much money a newspaper can lose in a year.
Yeah. I'm public about it. I tell people we lost $52,000 last year. And I've had some say, really? It's like, yeah. I mean, this is what it costs to rent an office, have phone line, internet, an office manager, a reporter, some freelance, printing, postage, air freight, and this is what it takes in advertising.
Pat Doherty says that McClatchy's lost $100 million over the course of owning the ADN.
Yeah, and Pat would...
Well, interesting, Ryan Bakley was like, I question that figure. I think they lost a lot of money. I'm not sure it was $100 million.
I mean, and I worked at the Daily News a couple different times, once as a Juneau reporter and once as editorial page editor, but I was not involved in any financial discussions. Oh, I was editorial page editor when Pat was there as editor. Yeah, I don't know if we can save newspapers. I used to think, we could. Perseverance, hard work, better products, but and this is not to condemn the world. That's just not how people get their news anymore.
I want to talk more about that, but let's go back to you and your wife own the Sentinel.
Right.
And you were there for 8 years?
About 8.5 years, yeah.
And then you guys decided to sell and get out.
So we sold it to a couple from Anchorage who had worked with the Daily News. And then Leslie and I moved to Juneau, and she went to work for the Juneau Empire, and I went to work for the Anchorage Times, which is kind of funny because the Anchorage Times, the Empire,
the voice of the oil industry.
Right. And Bob Atwood was still alive, and he wanted to rip the Capitol out of Juneau. So it was funny. So I came to Juneau as the Anchorage Times Capitol reporter, went to an orientation session at the start of the 1985 session where the press corps would meet legislative staff.
So you were like the Juneau correspondent for the Anchorage Times.
Right. We did this orientation session where legislative staff got to meet the Capitol reporters. And then I was leaving. I was going down the elevator with a staff member from Juneau who said, Larry, which paper you with again? She was trying to remember.
Right.
I said, the Anchorage Times. And she looked at me and she said, that's the bad one, isn't it? I said, yeah, that's the bad one. That's the one that wants to destroy your town. So yeah, I worked for the Times for about a year and then left that and became an investigator for the state ombudsman's office, which is kind of like being a reporter with subpoena powers.
Right. That job, you could say, is pretty nonpartisan to be.
Yeah, it was.
But you were chief of staff for Mike Hawker, for John Lincoln.
I was a staffer for Hawker.
Staffer for Hawker.
Yeah.
Chief of staff for John Lincoln.
Right.
So later working for legislators, you were partisan staff. That's what we would call
partisan in that it's not civil service.
Most interesting to me about your career trajectory is that you were able to go work in those more partisan positions and then go back to journalism. And I think for some people, I think that, once they make that leap, that they're never going to be considered an objective journalist again.
Right. So you're right. I worked for Hawker as a staffer in 07, 08. When I worked for Mike Hawker, he was pretty reasonable. I mean, he's gone a little more conservative since then, but I was really doing oil and gas issues for him. And when I was hired, I made some conditions. I will not work on gun legislation. And Mike back then was an interesting guy. He wanted to bring back defined benefit, but before Hawker, I'd worked in D.C. for the office of the governor. Anyway,
you were like the liaison.
Right. So the state of Alaska, as most states, has an office in the nation's capital to work on the state's behalf with federal agencies.
Right.
Be that liaison, that go-between. So I worked for the
on oil and gas issues.
Office of the Governor in D.C. in 07, 08 on oil and gas, transportation, communication, tax, fiscal, budget. I quit that after about a year.
Were you always registered nonpartisan or were you registered Democrat?
Most of the time, nonpartisan. Sometimes I get pissed off and go make it myself a D, and then I go back to being nonpartisan.
You're nonpartisan right now?
I believe so.
Okay, back.
Yeah.
So you were the liaison while Palin was governor.
Right. Well, we had a director of the office, and they had a few associate directors, and I was one of those. We each had our different topics. Arctic was one of mine. I left after a year in that job, in great part because Palin had no interest in federal issues. So you're sitting there, hi, I'm associate director of the State of Alaska office on all these issues, working at the behest of the governor, who never calls and has no interest in anything we do.
And you can't really speak for her because you don't know what she thinks about what.
Right. I just want to work on the issues. I did have one correspondence with Palin, one email from her. This is when the state of Alaska, pretty sure it was 2008, was doing that huge dividend, $3,200. They call it part of a big, because oil prices were high. We had all this money.
ACES had passed.
Right. And she said, is there anything we can do to make that money exempt from federal income tax? I wrote back, said, no, Governor, you can't.
Especially with the name dividend.
Right.
As you've talked about in your editorials.
Right. So I did that for your left. So I decided, it's summer in D.C. I'll just hang out here. And then it was announced that she's the vice presidential candidate. And a former journalist in Alaska, Michael Carey, worked for the Daily News, editorial page editor for a long time, was getting inundated with phone calls from the Boston Globe, New York Times, CNN, BBC. They wanted someone in Alaska to talk about Palin. And Michael called me that morning and said, God, Larry, I can't handle all these calls. You're in D.C. You take some of them. So then when people like CNN's Christian Science Monitor, BBC, said, oh, you mean you worked for her? You're a journalist.
Like the perfect person.
Right. I had actually moderated one of the gubernatorial debates when she ran for governor. It was on public broadcasting between her and Knowles and Halcrow. And I said, well, yeah, I'm here. I got nothing to do. Sure. And so I started doing the interviews because I really did not think she should be that close to being president of the United States. So initially they say, can you be here at 3:00 for a taping? Yeah, sure. Because I wasn't working.
Right.
So I put on the suit and I shave and I take a cab or a train to these studios. And at one point, someone said, would you like us to send a car? Really? You'll send a car for me? Sure. So then the car would come and they'd have M&Ms and bottles of water in the back. And I thought, this is pretty cool. And I'd steal some granola bars on the way out. So I did that till the election was over. And then I came back to Alaska and worked for Hawker.
Okay, so bouncing way back, back to Juneau.
Right.
You were working the Capitol for the Anchorage Times. You did that for a year.
Right.
Then what happened?
I was the Times reporter when the Bill Sheffield impeachment session was on.
It seems like, and I haven't reviewed the various coverage, that the Anchorage Times would be particularly anti-Sheffield.
Oh, God. Yeah, we got sued for libel. So,
but you personally wouldn't have been like, and the funny thing about the Sheffield impeachment, for listeners who don't know, Governor Sheffield had an impeachment trial. By today's standards, it seems like not very corrupt.
The state wanted a new state office building in Fairbanks, and the allegation was that he set up the request for proposals for the lease in such a way that it steered that lease to a politically favored person, that they drew a map that, hey, only this guy's going to be able to get this lease.
Because they said it has to be in this area. Yeah.
Right. And it was only going to be him. So, yeah, they had the impeachment. It was, he was not convicted by the Senate, but it was a circus.
And, I interviewed Joe Josephson, who was in the Senate at the time and kind of served as the de facto defense attorney for Sheffield. And what he said in his interview was that what saved Sheffield was a televised interview where he came up looking stupid. And so that it literally appeared to the public that, he actually appears like somebody who does not know what's going on and that he may not have known that this was happening.
Right, that's part of it. But it was, like I say, you had the New York Times and all the big papers, because how often do governors get impeached? So they all came and crowded into the Capitol press room. We were all covering this. And
was there pressure from you from the paper to be more critical of Sheffield?
Yes, and that was why we got sued. So myself, and then they sent down a second reporter, so the two of us are covering the impeachment. An editor in Anchorage edited a story to be more nasty to Sheffield. And the newspaper got sued for libel because of it, settled it, did a front page apology, front page correction. It didn't name us as reporters because Sheffield wasn't mad at it. He knew the Times had done this on purpose. Yeah, working for the Times was a challenge, particularly at that point.
But I'm assuming it paid well because having interviewed Pat Doherty, he said, that was that newspaper war that went on for a decade between the two, that there was millions of dollars being poured into the papers to compete with each other, to hire more reporters, to do more stories, to do.
Also, keep in mind, my wife and I have been working 8.5 years in Wrangell essentially for one salary. So to leave the paper and come to Juneau, we both got a salary. She got one from the Empire. I got one from the Times. We bought a condo. We bought a used car. When you have two incomes instead of just living off one, we
changes everything.
Right. We felt we were pretty well off. And so I don't remember how much it was. It wasn't a lot, but it was sufficient because we had two incomes and not many expenses.
Did your wife die in a car accident in Juneau?
Yeah, in 87.
And where were you working then?
I was at the Ombudsman's office as an investigator, and she was with the Juneau Empire as a reporter. About
the Juneau Empire in that period, Pat Doherty didn't really have any positive things to say about the Juneau Empire, but he was specifically talking about when Suzanne Downing was the editor.
Right.
So
that was after me.
Yeah. I don't know if the Juneau Empire was doing good work then.
We were. So Leslie worked with the Empire in the 80s, and I wanted to, but they had a nepotism policy then that you could not have related to the paper. So then when she died in 87, then I worked for the Associated Press in the Capitol for a few years and then went to the Empire. But now I could get a job there. And then, so I was at the Empire for 6 years. And I think, and the paper was making money. It was a good paper at the, at one point, our newsroom was 16 full-time people. Wow. I mean, now it's 2.
Yeah.
I mean, it was...
And now I don't really know what's happening at the Empire with the Juneau Independent opening up. And
no, I thought it was a very good paper. We actually had a budget to do things. We had good staff. Yeah, it was a good time to be there.
Were you at work when you found out about the car accident?
Actually, I was driving.
You were driving?
Yeah. I was taking her to work.
Oh, you were in the car with her?
Right. And it's one of those, you make a left-hand turn, it's Egan Drive, and I didn't think the other, I waited till the yellow. I didn't think the other car would come through the intersection, and he did, and it's...
Were you injured?
I was hospitalized, but just for a day or so, and I think, just a day.
Was she killed instantly?
No. It's an interesting story. So... I was driving. She was in the passenger seat making a left-hand turn, and we got T-boned by a car coming the other direction. And they cut her out of the car, took her to the ER, and took me to the hospital too. And the doc at one point, and the time's a little fuzzy, came in and said she's not going to make it. And he described the injuries. He said, she's not going to make it. And so I had friends around, and we're making plans at that point. And the next morning, she made it through the night, but she wasn't expected to.
So there was hope.
Well, I'm not sure much hope, but they medevaced her out that night. They medevaced her out to Seattle, but they didn't think she was going to make it. But so she died the next day. Yeah.
While you were in Juneau and hospitalized.
And because they told us, I don't know the exact words, but she's not going to make it, and they even said she was dead. The Empire the next morning had a story saying she had died.
Oh, when she was still alive.
But she was still alive, we found out the next morning. So, to his credit, the publisher of the Empire that afternoon, Empire was an afternoon paper. The accident was in the morning. They had the story that she didn't make it, printed it, started passing out the newspaper, got a call late that afternoon that she was still alive and they were going to send her to Seattle that night. So the publisher paid people to go around town and take back the newspaper, actually pull it back and redo it. Yeah. Anyway,
but of course it ended up being accurate.
Right. It was. She died the next morning. Just too much. Massive injuries.
I mean, I just can't even imagine. Like, I mean, you've done the whole Alaska adventure together.
Yeah.
Did you think about leaving Alaska?
No, I didn't. No one's ever asked me that. I thought, gee, I have all these friends here. People stay with you in the hospital. Friends accompanied me down to Seattle to meet with her family and the docs. No, I guess I didn't think of leaving Alaska. I thought, well, now what do I do? But let's see, at that point, we'd been in Alaska 11 years. But no, I guess I didn't. I think what I thought is I got to get back to life, right? I got to recover from my injuries and go back to work.
Mm.
But I went back to work after a couple of weeks at the ombudsman's office, and I quickly realized I'm not in a good position to have a job where my job is to listen to people complaining when they call up. It's like, I don't want to hear your complaints. I got my own. So I went back to journalism as a Capitol reporter for the Associated Press.
I'm just mentioning it. Becca Braun, her husband died tragically.
Right.
And I remember when I interviewed her, she went back to work covering the Capitol immediately.
Yeah.
Didn't stop at all.
Yeah. I mean, it took me a couple of weeks to get back to work just for my own injuries and doing funerals. But yeah, I went back to work. I don't know what a psychologist would tell you that's not the good thing, but I just felt I had to. And going back at the ombudsman's office, even though they were supportive and friends, I realized this probably isn't, I don't want to hear about someone else's problems.
Right.
And I enjoyed being a reporter. I enjoyed being in the Capitol. That seemed a comfortable place to go.
Was Leslie Jewish?
No, she was a non-practicing Episcopalian.
So did y'all do a funeral?
I did 3 funerals. Did one in Wrangell, one in Juneau, and one in Chicago.
Well, she was from Chicago as well.
Yeah, she was from the north side. I was from the south side, but yeah, we did one. So, but non-denominational services.
So you went to work for the Associated Press in Juneau.
Yeah.
And
for 3 years.
3 years.
Yeah.
Working for a national news outlet in, I guess, smaller town, Alaska, in Juneau. What was that experience like? And what did the AP want you to report on?
I just covered the legislature for them. So it was pretty easy. Back then, the Associated Press in Alaska was much bigger than it is now. There were 4 full-time people in Anchorage and the 2 of us in Juneau during session. And we covered every floor action, every bill. I mean, I enjoyed it because you learn a lot.
Right. So I've quoted this story a few times. It was on the media about a month ago where they talked about a study out of Northwestern University that showed that over half the counties in America, so boroughs in Alaska, are without a local newspaper.
Yeah.
And then they coupled that with a study out of Tulane and Columbia, I think, that showed that when there is no local news coverage, the corruption of the local government goes up by 6.9%. And that's based on actual prosecutions. So probably the rate of corruption is much higher. It's just that, if no one's watching, who knows? And Tom Hewitt talked about immediately, once he went to work in Fairbanks for the mayor's office, of being in meetings where he'd look around the room and be like, where's the journalist? Because if they heard what this guy just said, this would be front page news tomorrow.
And there's
no one there.
Yeah. And it's not like we voluntarily abdicated responsibility. It's just there's not the revenue to pay to put people there.
Nat Hurst really pushed back on this. What his pushback was, yeah, but I don't know what you're talking about, Andrew. ADN still has people in all the Anchorage meetings. ADN has 2 reporters in the Capitol. This fear that you have that journalism has decreased so much in Alaska that we don't have coverage just isn't true. They're there.
It is there, but they're not there in the numbers. The Fairbanks Daily News Monitor used to have a Juneau reporter. KTOU, like Alaska's news source, used to have a full-time Juneau reporter. The AP used to have 2 people. It's now got 1, and they don't do that much general coverage. The United Press International at one point had a Juneau reporter. The Daily News would have 2 during session. Now they just have 1, and they add to it. There used to be the Anchorage Times.
So there was a lot more.
There was a lot more.
And I'll just get your perspective on it. There are folks who are reporting on Juneau from watching Gavel to Gavel.
Yeah.
And to me, that's not the same
I agree.
because although theoretically the members of the committee know that someone could be watching online. It's not the same as having a reporter sitting in the front row.
No, I think if you're sick, don't bring your illness to the committee meeting covered on Gavel Gavel. But being in the room, watching who's talking to who's passing notes to who.
At ease.
Who's in the audience paying attention. It just does not compare.
I'm going to go to a spicier place maybe.
Okay.
But
is this going to cause me heartburn?
No, we're going to talk about blogs and blog coverage and how that's
garbage.
Because we have Matt Buxton, and I'm going to say the name. I mean, and I feel guilty that I haven't said his name more often because he is part of this blogosphere.
Yeah.
But all his coverage is from watching Gavel to Gavel.
Right.
He's not present in Juneau at all. Jeff Landfield is in the room.
Oh,
he
yeah,
is one of
Jeff's
the.
there.
He is in. And
you know when Jeff's in the room.
You know when
he
Jeff's in the room.
announces it.
He announces it. He tweets it immediately.
Yes.
It's like sitting in House Judiciary.
Which is why I will not sit next to Jeff in a room because I don't want to be part of the tweets.
And I think that you've spoken publicly on the record of not being a fan of the landmine. Well, you know, and I guess I'll say it. Suzanne Downing definitely reports from Gavel to Gavel because she's not in the room. Very rarely.
She's not even in this earth. But yeah, she's clearly not in the room.
But then I have to say, as a legislator, sometimes the only person who saw what was happening was Jeff Landfield.
Yeah.
And I'm grateful that someone saw it.
Yeah. No, Jeff does serve a purpose. He's determined and dogged and assertive, and he does some good reporting. It's just his personality detracts from it, I think.
Well, and this is where we're getting to like where people are and where newspapers fit into the informational ecosphere.
Yeah.
Jeff can kind of go viral sometimes. Like, I mean, he's been working on it for years of like how to get more attention. He wants more attention. And he's kind of learned how to bring the attention toward him. If somebody says like, hey, the governor is, the governor is now telling everybody that they have to go to the special session.
Yeah.
I immediately go on X and click on Landmine and say, well, is Jeff tweeting about it? Like, where did that come from?
He's developed good sources.
And because I know that the ADN may report on it, but I may not see it for 6 or 8 hours. It could come out in another source, but if I want to see it right now, probably Jeff tweeted it.
Because he's more immediate, because he's not worried about city council or assembly or school board. He can just focus on that one area that is his expertise and be quicker about it.
But I think as we've descended into these silos of information with, Fox News sort of being the preeminent right-wing media establishment, and then I feel like Must Read Alaska filling that role in Alaska.
Right. Shrill and dishonest,
Shrill very often. There's just this willingness to print a story without ever reaching out. Doing research, like
because it's not news, it's just what do I have here that I can twist into bolstering my point?
Republican colleagues have told me that they've been in Republican caucus meetings where they put Suzanne Downing on the phone and said, hey, if we go out there and support this particular amendment or bill, will you not write about it? Basically, she's determining what bill is going to pass or not because they don't want to be blown up. I've had another Republican colleague.
They're afraid.
Jamie Allard had brought forward this legislative citation. We tabled it.
Oh, right, on Suzanne. Yeah.
We tabled it this year, and there was, some controversy about that.
Yeah.
But I had a Republican in the House whisper to me, if we could vote our conscience, the vote would be 39-1.
Yeah.
Jamie Allard would be the only person.
Well, if the U.S. Senate could vote their conscience, legislators, members of Congress, too many of them they've shredded their conscience and they let social media and fear dictate what they say publicly, how they vote, and that's sad.
I mean, obviously, I'm not a Republican. I'm not a conservative. My voters aren't generally reading Must Read Alaska, so I don't really need to care. But what I have learned over the years is that the good news about being trashed in Must Read Alaska is that they do so many stories that it goes away, and it's a 24-hour news cycle.
Right, not much staying power.
There'll be 5 more stories print it and it'll go away. Just wait it out. So, and I wish I could say that to my Republican colleagues, being like, look, so she'll write something terrible about you. In 5 hours, there'll be 4 more stories.
But they're afraid that she will label them as a Republican in name only or gutless or not support. And they're worried about their damn reelection. And
hey, there's a lot of folks who are worried about their damn reelection.
It's not just Republicans.
I mean, on both sides, there's a shocking lack of courage from some folks.
Oh, yeah. Right. Privately, they'll tell me one thing. They'll say, oh, don't print that because this is, I get it. I understand it. It's just, it's sad.
I hate it when other people say that. Just put it out there because it's true.
Yeah, it is. But we have a hard time with truth in society these days.
So I guess that is kind of talking about the current media landscape in Alaska. What are your concerns about where we are and where we're going?
So it's not relegated only to Alaska. Newspapers, radio. I mean, you got to make payroll. You got to have enough money. I am getting increasingly depressed at the prospect that there just isn't a way to support all the newspapers we have in Alaska. I think we're going to lose some. There's just, the traditional advertising isn't there. Expenses continue to go up. You're right. You got to pay people enough that they can afford to live and get a place and have a car and take a vacation once a year. And I know several newspapers are thinking, well, we got to go appeal to the community. You go to the website and it says donate, support journalism. With the rescissions package and taking back all the public broadcasting money, this is just kind of my mental wandering in the past week. So you've got public radio saying, if we just lost half our funding, community's got to step up. Meanwhile, newspapers are saying, gee, we can't make it as a business because there's no department store, car dealer, real estate advertising, readership's down. We're also going to the community and saying, there's only so much money in the community to support news because the same donors we're going after, whether it's for the newspaper or the public radio station or the community foundation or the food bank or the homeless shelter, there's only so much money to get. Can I stand here and tell you, cut your donations to the food bank and give money to the newspaper instead? Granted, there's some people who can afford to do all of them, but most people, there's a certain amount they can spend on donations, and there's a limit. I think, and I'm not trying to say there's going to be a war between public radio and newspapers, but I think they're both going after the same donors, and I don't think there's enough for all of it.
Well, so I interviewed James Devins when I was in Valdez this past weekend. He is the director of public radio station in Valdez. And a point that he made was it's a problem of scale. He said, the public radio station in New York City has potentially 12 million listeners. Yeah. If they each gave a penny, they could support the radio station.
Right, but these smaller towns, there's no scale.
Is it in Valdez? He's like, we already have really a $10 per capita donation for our listenership. Mm-hmm. Vastly greater than New York City.
Oh, yeah. Alaska's always supported public radio very strongly.
And 70% of their funding is federal. So he's like, we're losing 70% of our funding, and we already have a generous donor base that other markets would be extraordinarily jealous of. Yeah. We just don't have the people.
No.
There's no way we can do it.
Right. So whether it's Valdez or Wrangell or Petersburg, Sitka, Ketchikan, you got these small population base, these not exceedingly wealthy towns. The radio stations are going to have to raise hundreds of thousands more. Newspapers are thinking, well, if I can't get enough advertising subscriptions, sure, I got to get more online, change the product, appeal to people. But I also see on a lot of the websites, there's a donate now, support journalism now button. We're going after the same people. There's just a finite amount of money. And again, with all the federal cutbacks, what do I want to do? Do I want to give money to Alaska Public Media or the food bank? At some point, most of us run out of money. We can make the donations. We have to start choosing which ones.
Well, and you're doing your part. You're losing $52,000 a year to keep a local newspaper.
I'm going to lose less this year. But but I'm of the age where I have to make donations. Or I have to do withdrawals from my IRA. And since I don't necessarily need it, I can give it to donors. I'm not exactly Warren Buffett, but I subscribe to the theory I'd be happy to die penniless. I might as well start spending some of my savings.
Hey, can we talk a little bit about the 5 years that you spent doing work on the gas line?
Right.
Well, tell us what your role was.
In federal law, 2004, they set up long bureaucratic title, Office of the Federal Coordinator for Alaska Natural Gas Transportation Projects. Who wrote that should be shot. Anyway, the idea was separate from federal licensing, permits, environmental reviews. This project was so big that you needed an office who was concierge, not an advocate necessarily, but an agency that could help coordinate all these different federal agencies and requirements with the project developer so things could go as smoothly as possible. We had no regulatory authority, couldn't override anybody, but power of persuasion and God, I hate the word facilitating. Anyway.
And what years were this?
So I was there in 2010, 2015.
Okay.
The first federal coordinator was Drew Pierce, former legislator, who's now back with the federal government under the Trump administration. When Obama came in, the Obama administration decided to make a change, and Drew Pierce was out and I was brought in. And back then, this was before shale gas developed in the lower
Before
48.
fracking.
So back in when this law was passed in 2004, even when I took over in 2010, there was at that point, credible belief that North America would run short of natural gas. Before fracking, hydraulic fracturing, you could see production reserves. It was in decline. So the idea back then, 20 years ago, was, God, maybe this is finally time for the Alaska gas pipeline.
Because the demand will be such that it will pencil out.
Right. You need gas, again, before...
You could charge enough to make it worth it.
Right. Before they'd figured out how to do fracking and produce trillions and trillions of cubic feet. So this was going to be the pipeline that would go from the North Slope down to past Tok, take a turn, go through Canada, connect to the grid. Then fracking changed that. And by 2012, 2013, it was clear no one needed Alaska gas in the lower 48, so it switched back again to an export project. So I ran that till 2015 when Congress pulled the funding and I closed it down, which I don't want to say it's fun. I remember calling the General Services Administration, which is kind of the quartermaster's landlord for all federal agencies. I said, I got to close this office. I mean, literally, Anchorage, D.C., everything, not just the records, the furniture. And the person at GSA said, because I asked him, how do I do it? She said, I don't know. We've never closed a federal agency before. They probably have learned since.
Yeah.
But yeah, we liquidated, gave away furniture, equipment, the shredders, the flags, everything, and closed it down.
Can you talk briefly about where you think the pipeline is today in 2025?
Nowhere. This euphoria with Trump and Dunleavy and Senator Dan Sullivan. Oh, we're closer than ever before. We're going to have a gas line. No, there's gobs more gas in the world, even with increasing demand. Gobs more gas that Asia can get that's cheaper and less risky than Alaska gas. No one in industry believes this $44 billion estimate. No one believes you can build it in 2 or 3 years. In the meantime, there's other places they can go. Japan, South Korea certainly don't want to piss off Trump. So they're saying, oh, sure, yeah, boy, we'll talk to you about it. We're really interested and excited about this. They're not signing anything. They're not writing any checks. They're not stepping forward to be investors. 2 or 3 years from now, I think people look back and say, well, gee, nothing happened, did it? Yeah, I don't think. We're too expensive, too risky. Takes too long to build, not going to happen.
Last thing I want to talk about is you had an editorial in the ADN yesterday about Senate Bill 113, which would basically place a corporate income tax on on companies doing business in Alaska that aren't based in Alaska. Digital companies. And Amazon comes to mind. I mean, I'll just say Amazon does a lot. I order things from Amazon. Everybody does.
Right. And it's not just Amazon, but in decades ago, your corporate income tax was determined by how much payroll you have in the state, how many offices you have in the state, how many sales you have in the state. Now the world has changed. We have all these businesses making a profit from Alaskans, but they have no presence in Alaska. So this would change the state's corporate tax code so Alaska could get a slice of their profits commensurate with how much of their sales are in Alaska compared to their sales.
Right. And I guess like what I learned from your op-ed
Yeah.
is that it hasn't been vetoed yet, which
Hasn't even been transmitted yet as of
that
last
is
week.
so interesting.
Well, I assume they're just, well, I don't know why, but
Gaming it somehow.
as of last week, it hadn't even been transmitted.
I wonder if they transmit after special sessions.
I don't know. I kind of wonder.
I don't know. I mean, it's tricky. I'll just say, as somebody working in the building and talking with my colleagues often, there are certain folks who, like we just said, lacking in courage, who believe that supporting any tax of any sort, no matter how much, this is not about taxing Alaskans. This is about taxing multi-billion-dollar corporations
who are making money off Alaskans.
Who are making money off Alaskans, that they feel that if they support any tax whatsoever, that they will lose their next election.
Or their next of kin. So maybe leadership is holding the bill on purpose, trying to negotiate, because once you transmit it, then the clock starts, and he vetoes or not. So maybe they're saying, well, if I don't transmit it, maybe we can continue to negotiate so he won't veto it. But yeah, as of last week, it had not been transmitted to the governor.
Larry Persily, thanks so much for being on today. Do you have a book to recommend?
It has nothing to do with journalism or anything?
Yeah, you can recommend whatever you want. By the way, Ryan Binkley, when I interviewed him, he had an enormous poster of Ayn Rand behind him throughout the interview. I did it on Zoom.
Yeah, it's not my book. Boy, I don't know the name. I read it a year ago and it really struck me. It's a story about an American woman who had worked as a spy for the French during World War II because the U.S. wouldn't hire her because she was a woman. And she had this incredible story. I think she had lost a leg as a child.
A Woman of No Importance?
That's it, yes. It's a great book, great story. You read the story about this woman with
by Sonia Purnell.
Hiking over the Pyrenees to get away from the Germans who are chasing her because they figured out that she's the spy who's been leaking all this information to... Yeah, incredible story. Great book.
Awesome. Well, thanks for the recommendation and thanks for being on the show.
Sure.
The book Larry recommended was A Woman of No Importance, The Untold Story of the American Spy Who Helped Win World War II by Sonia Purnell. Thank you, listeners. If you like what you heard, please subscribe, rate, and review us. To contact me, email rep.andrew.gray@aklag.gov or call 907-269-0123.